there is one thing I wanted to say, and that was that when I met Dr. Gigold and Brian Kahn, I thought of Dr. Gigold as a Holocaust survivor, and Brian Kahn as a Jew. And that was, that picture that I had of them. And Dr. Gigold was like up on a pedestal. But I could not see them as what they were, and that was people. They ate, they drank, they slept, they worked, they bought groceries, they cooked, they had children, all those things. The same things we do. So they weren't in these little categories. I'm still working on that. But I feel like they have become friends to me during this process. I'm not sure I whined a lot, called them up and said, well, what do I do now? And so they listened a lot, but they helped, okay? And I think what I want to suggest is when you look out at those posters and look at the exhibit, you look at people. You look at their faces and see people. People that were somebody's neighbors, people that were somebody's parents, people that were somebody's children. And remember that, not that they were Jews or strange people that Hitler felt he had to get rid of. But remember what they really were, and that is people just like you and I. So when you look out at society, your neighbor, whatever, remember that they are people. They may think differently than you, they may act differently than you, and you may not accept their viewpoints, but it doesn't mean you condemn them. It doesn't mean you shun them. So, just something I was thinking about this morning and remembered. Well, our worship this morning will be a bit different. We welcome all who have come to join us for this special service. We are especially privileged to have with us today Mr. William or Bill Gigold, seated right there, a man who was born in the Warsaw Ghetto during Nazi occupation, who survived that ordeal and who is here today to share with us. We pray that we may all remember the lessons of history. And I'd also like to introduce Brian Kahn, seated right there. And he listened to me a lot. So he was a big help in this. So let us begin with prayer. Gracious and loving God, we pray that your Spirit may move among us as we are gathered today. We give thanks for Mr. Gigold's presence among us and for his explanation and presentation today. Move us to remember the dangers of hateful rhetoric and actions, and inspire us to be moved with love, compassion, and care for all. This we pray as followers of Jesus, who are united with our Jewish siblings, all of us, your beloved children, who live in trust and hope in your grace and mercy. Amen. Now please welcome Mr. Bill Gigold, whose presentation will be the basis for our worship today.
Am I on? Can you hear me back there? Okay. I think she just gave the whole presentation. Let me just take my coat off here. Thank you very much for being here this morning, and also thank you very much for allowing me to share maybe about 50 minutes of time with you this morning about the Gigold family, particularly, and some of the activities that they engaged in or didn't engage in during the Holocaust, which was a very dark period, not only for society, but especially for the Jewish people. I'm not a techie, so if I screw this up, you'll understand that, okay? Let me just move this out of the way a bit. I have an outline here of some of the topics that I'll touch upon. I won't touch upon all of them. And what I like to do is talk with you for about 50 minutes, give or take a few minutes, and then if you could kind of think of questions that you might want to ask me after I do a presentation. I'd be delighted to have the opportunity to interact with you a little closer and try to answer as many questions as I can. Okay, so kind of think about questions that you might ask as I'm rattling on here a little bit. All right? So anyway, this is kind of the outline. All of the Gigolds that I'll be talking about in terms of my immediate family, they have all passed. I'm the last one. Okay, we were all born in Warsaw, Poland. Warsaw is the capital of Poland, and it was the capital of Poland. I'll very briefly, mention the invasion of Poland by Germany, which was really the beginning of the Second World War. And then I'll spend quite a bit of time talking about Warsaw and the Warsaw Ghetto and some of the activities of the people within the ghetto, and particularly my immediate family. And then I'll just ramble on other topics if there's time. Okay? So let's get rolling. I want to introduce you to really the main characters here. I tried to walk around, so on the left there is my mother, Leah. She was just a little bit, I would say she was about 5'1" in height. And then my dad was Duvet, that's in Hebrew or Yiddish, and he was about 6'2". And the reason I want to talk about them is, one, that's why I'm here today. Okay? Not only that, but they have some unique characteristics as people. My mom was a pretty quiet type of person. Never went to school. She was basically an unskilled laborer, just like my dad was. But yet she had some very strong presence in terms of understanding how you keep a family together under the most critical and dangerous situations. So periodically I'll sneak in some comments about my parents. David, on the other hand, was a hyperactive adult. He couldn't stop moving at all. But one of the strengths he had was he could anticipate. He was always planning ahead. And that's one of the things that was one of his strengths, aside from just being gutsy, is that he would think ahead. And I'll point that out to you because our survival depended on those two people. Okay? I just want to make a couple of comments about Jewish people in general. Not too much. We will just some highlighting points with understanding that across any group of people, you have a great amount of variability in terms of people that do one thing and don't do another thing, etc. One of the things, by and large, is that Jewish people have a commitment to community and social equality. They want to be treated like everyone else, and they want to treat others as you treat them. Except, one of the interesting things about Jews is they have no concept of vengeance. So kind of keep this in mind, because at the end of the Second World War, a lot of vengeance could have occurred, but the Jewish people did not resort to that. We believe in one God, like many of you do. Sometimes it's the same God that we believe in. Our cultural values and traditions are extremely important to the Jewish people, regardless of where a Jewish person lives. Some of the traditions and cultural components are carried over to that community. That's one of the reasons that when you have a Jew living in North Africa and a Jew living in America, they have some common cultural and traditional aspects to their not only faith, but their understanding. If I'm talking too fast, let me know. We have a sign expert here. Okay. I usually talk very slow, so you're lucky. And then the general value of committing to the Ten Commandments. Most Jews do that, just like most of us here do that. But we have some variability in terms of which ones we put emphasis on versus others that we kind of sometimes forget about. But, so those are some of the kind of, if you will, some underlying general principles for Jews across the board, recognizing that each one of us is an individual and has its own personality, characteristics, etc. So I will move ahead here. Why do we have Holocausts or genocides? And it really comes down to this word right here, this one right here. Hate. When things, and by the way, all of these other items feed into causing hate. Okay. So if you can eliminate a lot of the stuff, let's say in prevention, you can at least try to reduce the notion of hate. Now, when hate reaches a certain threshold that starts turning into violence, that's when you start having genocides. And I won't, go into this at this point in time. I want to talk about my parents. Okay. Just some background information. The population of Poland was about, I think about 3 million at that time. The Jewish people comprised about 10% of that population, and most of them were concentrated in the capital of Poland, which was Warsaw, Poland. So you can see some numbers here. And just to mention, if you're not familiar with Poland and Warsaw, Poland, prior to the Second World War, Warsaw was one of the cultural capitals of the world. in terms of theater, music, films, etc., etc. So it was a very progressive community, and the Jewish people were a significant part in establishing that cultural base. Now, unfortunately, like in many other countries, even though there was a large Jewish population of about 350 to 400,000 people, they were never assimilated into the Polish culture. Now, we don't have time to go into all the reasons why, but okay. The invasion of Poland started in September 1, 1939. About a week later, the Nazis started attacking Warsaw. Okay? I mentioned my dad. When the war started, he started anticipating what might be happening to Poland, and particularly Warsaw, and particularly the Jewish people. So he started planning ahead in terms of how do I deal with my counterparts, other Jewish people, as well as my immediate family. So he was thinking ahead, and I'll share with you shortly what his thoughts turned into. Okay, let me point out to you the character by the name of Baruch, which is a Hebrew term, happens to be me. Okay? And I'll explain to you a little later why I have the name William, which is part of my life, I guess. I was born on September 20th, 1939. And one day after I was delivered, the hospital that my mom and I were in was bombed. Okay, remember I've mentioned something about my dad. He was anticipating that as soon as Germany entered Poland, that they were going to attack Warsaw. So as soon as I was born, he went to the hospital to get my mother and me out of the hospital, because they were attacking mostly big buildings initially. Okay? So anyway, the war was very short-lived for Poland. They surrendered just about less than 4 weeks later. And you can understand why. In terms, the Polish military was still using horses and pistols, while the Nazi military were using tanks, fighter planes, etc. So there was no ability to fight. This is a picture of a maternity ward at that hospital. Okay. Can you see all these high-tech devices here? Okay. As happens in most cases, when you start hearing bombs fly and hitting buildings, you go into basements. They did the same thing in Warsaw, Poland, just as they do in Ukraine. When the Russians are bombing Ukraine, the only relatively safe space is in the basement. Here is a hospital in the basement. This is what the hospital looked like after it was bombed. Just one picture. Okay, let me introduce you to a few more Gigold, who at least were in our lives at that point in time. I mentioned my dad, David, and Leah. Then I had an aunt by the name of Chava, and an uncle by the name of Ephraim. Chava was about 17 years of age. Ephraim was about 21, 22 years of age. And I had an older brother who was about 7 years older than I am, by the name of Samuel. And then I was just hanging in there in that whole scene. As I mentioned to you again, my dad was anticipating that. As soon as he got us out of the hospital, he started pulling the family together and trying to flee Warsaw. Now, just to give you a little frame of reference, at that time, Germany and Russia had a non-aggression pact, which meant they wouldn't kill each other for a while. So basically, but the intent for almost all of the people in Warsaw and in Poland was to migrate, if they could, by whatever means, to the eastern part of Europe to get to Russia. So that's what my dad took on as his role of the family, to try to lead us towards the Russian encampments. Okay. In terms of trying to escape, most people, when the bombing started to occur, would try to get whatever valuables they had, whatever, things that they wanted to save to carry with them. And they were trying to escape as fast as possible on roads leading out from Warsaw towards the Russian borders. Unfortunately, the people that remained on roads were the first people to be killed by the Nazi airplanes, their fighter planes. They would fly over the roads, and anybody that was on there would be machine gunned. Now, my dad, again, plus maybe others, anticipated not to be on the road. They were always in the gullies or in the woods adjacent to the roads, because the roads were deadly. So thousands upon thousands of people were killed that way in the initial days of the war. We finally reach the Russian encampments, and the Russians put us on trucks. Unfortunately, the trucks are German trucks. And these trucks take us back to Warsaw, into an area which was eventually called the Warsaw Ghetto. And I'll talk a little bit about the Warsaw Ghetto. Panel number 18 is a good picture of the Warsaw Ghetto. So if you have a chance to look at that. We were brought into buildings that weren't totally bombed out, and there were basically our nuclear family of my aunt, uncle, my dad, mom, my older brother, and me. We were in one room, no heat, no light. The only place that was shared was a bathroom in the building. And a water spout. Okay? So the difficulty started right there in terms of what was happening to the Jewish people that were caught up in this net. At that point in time, I'm 1 week old. I'm talking, walking, dancing. I'm just kidding with you. Yeah, I wish. Okay, I'm just kidding with you. Okay. At that point in time, this place, which is the Warsaw Ghetto, starts being more formalized by the Nazis who control it. And one of the things that they start doing, if I can highlight this, they start picking up adults and children for war crews. So basically, my dad, my aunt, and uncle get picked up every morning around 6, 7 in the morning. When I say get picked up, they wind up going on a truck, just like other people from the ghetto, and they get transported to different factories as slave labor. And then in the evening, usually around 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, they're returned back to the Warsaw Ghetto. Some never come back, and there are a lot of reasons for that, and I just don't want to go into that at this point in time. But anyway, if you're a youngster that's like 13, 14 years of age and older, you fall into the category of slave labor, especially if you look healthy. Okay? Now, one of the things that I should point out is that Polish nurses would come into the ghetto for a number of different reasons, but one of them was to try to help as much as they could. And one of the things that they also, some of the nurses did, not all of them, a few of them would do, is approach mothers, usually, of very young children, and basically ask them, can I take the child from you to maybe smuggle your child to another country, or to have a Christian family adopt your child to prevent that child from dying? Because everybody was starting to read, I hate to say the word tea leaves, but people were starting to anticipate that survival is not going to be a long-term affair here. So they approached my mother and they said, can we take your son and try to save him from what might happen in the near future? And my mom totally refused. Her feeling was that she can defend me and my brother better than anybody else can. That was her position. Was it the right position? I would say right now, yes. But maybe at that time, maybe it was not a good position. But anyway, that's what happened. And it happened 2 or 3 times because these nurses were pretty persistent in trying to help where they could help. Anyway, just to give you a little flavor, you wonder how a mom can keep an infant one of the things that happened in the Warsaw Ghetto is people died frequently. 4,000 to 7,000 people a day. So kind of envision Gibson City, which probably has a population of about 35 to 4,000. Am I close?
Mm-hmm.
Every day, your whole city would be dead. So the magnitude of this is unbelievable. So anyway, people would die mostly of starvation, and I'll come to that shortly. But the ones that died in the apartments, what would happen to those people is that all of their clothes would be removed, not for religious reasons, but for survival reasons, because the clothes would be passed on to the living yet. And as an example, I have here, some of the clothes would be ripped up to be used by parents that had very young children that needed diapers, basically. So anyway, there was all kinds of trading to get what was needed for kids, basic nutrition to keep them alive. And that's one of the highest principles that the Jewish parents have, is what is the best I can do for my child? How can I keep my child alive? Just keep that in mind. Okay. Let me come to the Warsaw Ghetto itself. Okay, just envision that this rectangle is the city of Warsaw. And the city of Warsaw had about 1.2, 1.3 million people, and about 30%, or about 300 to 400,000 were Jewish people. Also envision this little square here. This was the size of the Warsaw Ghetto in terms of space relative to the size of the city of Warsaw. 1/3 of the population of Warsaw, which would have been about maybe 400,000, were put into this one square. This one square was a little bit over a square mile. So you can envision how crowded that was. And they didn't have the amenities like water, food, etc. So the plan was actually to have people just die in one fashion or another without having to shoot them. That was the intent initially of the Warsaw Ghetto. This just happens to be a picture when the ghetto wasn't totally formalized. As you can see, here is an open market and people seem to be smiling and interacting. And this was an open market on the Polish side of the Warsaw Ghetto. And there was free flow for a very, very short time. Then the Nazi regime started walling off the ghetto, putting up brick walls. And this is just an example of some laborers putting up that wall. And all of the laborers that put up the wall were the Jewish people who were living inside the ghetto. And that's just a description, and we won't go through that. Okay, let me tell you the survival issues a little bit. The main one was this one right here. About 60 to 70% of all of the people that died in the Warsaw Ghetto died because of starvation. They couldn't get food. Now, the only way to get food was to rely on different smuggling techniques, and I'll mention a few because my dad and my older brother were involved in that. And then, just to highlight a little bit of the severity of the starvation, normally between 2,000 and 2,500 calories of intake a day is the normal range for Americans. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. As you can see, the Germans were doing quite well in terms of food intake. Very much in the normal range during this whole event. Now, the Polish people were starting to suffer, even though they were Polish. And as you can see, their rations were about 1/4 of the Germans on a daily equivalent. And this is what the Jewish people worked on, is 1/10 starvation. Now, there were all kinds of other reasons why people died. Insufficient sanitation, usually leading to disease. And again, I don't want to go through all of this stuff, but this one was the nastiest one. And any smuggling that occurred was as a result to try to get food into the ghetto as much as possible. And the smuggling was done in conjunction with the Polish resistance fighters in most cases. And I'll explain how our family got involved in that. This is a picture, matter of fact, this is a picture that you'll see on one of the panels in terms of some kids in the Warsaw Ghetto. Now let me kind of highlight something here. I don't know if you can see back there, but this youngster is smiling. Why the heck would anyone be smiling under these circumstances? I'll tell you. Almost all of the photography, both motion photography, pictures, etc., were done by the Germans. And in all probability, a German soldier who was doing the photographing said, "You better smile here." Okay. This is another picture of a child. It's hard to tell what age the youngster is. The Jews themselves tried to figure out how to keep people alive within the Warsaw Ghetto. I'm sorry. And they tried these things, but they weren't allowed. If people got caught doing any of this, they were in for very severe punishment by the Nazis and the Polish military, or police, I should say. Okay. I told you I had an older brother. He was 7 years older than I was. So he was about 7 years of age at that time, or maybe 8. So any youngster that was generally under the age of 13 was not taken for slave labor. So my brother was with the family, with me and my mom most of the time. But they also had younger kids do all kinds of things. Remember how many people died in one day? They were usually put out on the street or by the buildings. And then these kids became corpse collectors. They would pick up these dead bodies, put them on carts, and take them to the gates where they would be disposed of in one fashion or another. And that's another whole different story. So anyway, my brother was a corpse collector for a couple of years. In addition, one of the things that, as part of the smuggling effort to bring food into the Warsaw Ghetto, tunneling became a high priority. Not only tunneling between buildings so things could be communicated, but also tunneling under the wall that was built around the Warsaw Ghetto. So, because the tunnels usually took so long, they tried to keep them as small as possible so one, they wouldn't be detected, and the other, that kids could crawl through quickly. So my older brother not only became a tunnel digger, but he also crawled through those tunnels to try to meet Polish resistance fighters who might bring food in exchange for other things. Okay. And as I mentioned to you before, the righteous nurses continued to come, and my mother turned it down the second time as well. Okay. In December 1941, living in the ghetto was almost becoming impossible. I mean, you had, initially the death rate was maybe 4,000 a day. Around 2 years later, it was up to 9,000 a day because of starvation, disease, etc. So, my dad, trying to think ahead of time, and others that he worked with, tried to plan an escape through the Warsaw city sewers. And as I mentioned to you, Warsaw was a very advanced city, not only from a cultural perspective, but also economically, etc., etc. So they had a good sewer system, which is a heck of a load for me to talk about. But anyway, so my dad and our family and other families got together and went into the sewers. And unfortunately, someone forgot to put the sewer lids down. And the Nazi patrols noticed that. And as soon as they noticed it, they started machine gunning into the sewers. And fortunately, our family and other families survived, and we were able to get back to our one-room condominium. I'm just kidding with you. Okay. So anyway, we were fortunate to survive that effort. So we could try another time. This is just a picture. I don't know who these people are, but as you can see, one of the tunnel diggers is a boy. So the younger kids that didn't go to slave labor, get picked up for slave labor, wound up working on tunneling and smuggling, and almost all for food, nothing else. want to show you this picture, just so you have a sense of how the Gigolds escaped. This is a kind of a drawing of the Warsaw Ghetto, this yellow stuff. Oh yeah, you probably can't read what's on there, but I think you can see the colors. And then you have the green, those are cemeteries that surround the Warsaw Ghetto. And one of the things that helped people survive, remember, was smuggling. And of course, the smuggling occurred between digging, tunneling under the wall to get to the cemeteries. And the reason for that is very seldom did the Nazi patrols patrol the cemeteries. So whoever tunneled through, mostly kids, would meet the Polish resistance fighters to make exchanges at different tombstones. And that's how they were able to bring in some food in exchange for other things. Now, some of the people in the Warsaw Ghetto came from very wealthy families. Most didn't have anything, but the ones that had something usually exchanged it for food. So this was my dad's plan, was to escape through these tunnels that were used to smuggle food in and out. And we were fortunate enough with other, and by the way, when I say our family, there were hundreds and thousands of other families. Some tried all kinds of different things. All I know is a little bit about my parents' efforts, so I can't talk for anybody else, really. Well, anyway, after getting out of the ghetto, we started moving again to the east of Warsaw, Poland, mostly through the woods, and usually traveling at night. And we had a lot of help, thank goodness, from Polish farmers on the way to the Russian borders. Now, fortunate for us, oh, by the way, this is a picture of the Warsaw Ghetto after it was leveled. Totally wiped out. And I apologize, I should have introduced these people. This is my aunt. Like I said, she was about 17. This was my uncle, about 21, 22. And this is my tough dad. And boy, he was tough. We traveled pretty much at night, and my uncle was kind of the scout for us. What he would do is he would approach a farm and the farmers and basically say, would you help a Jewish family? And most of the time they said no, because they were in danger themselves if they helped Jewish people. So if they got caught, they would get the same treatment as the Jewish people would. So you had a few farmers that said yes, we don't know the reasons why, but thank goodness that they said yes. Anyway, with my uncle being the scout, and the reason he was a scout is he was a pretty husky guy, he was still in pretty good shape. And sometimes the farmers would try to grab him to keep him for the German patrols. At other times, he was able to fight him off, and we would move on to another farm, etc. But we were very fortunate that we were able to wind up getting a lot of help from farmers on the way trying to get to the Russian border. Now, sometimes we use the term righteous for people that really are just righteous. I don't know what other term to use. But they have certain characteristics, and I just jotted down a few as I learned over the years. They gotta have some of these factors that make him righteous. And so if we can practice a lot of this stuff, we can fall into the righteous category, if you will, if you want to become righteous. Anyway, for nearly a month, we continued the journey from farm to farm. And we finally reached the Russian border. And fortunately for us and other Jewish people who fled just like we did, Russia and Germany were at war. So the non-aggression treaty was not in effect. So instead of being put on German trucks, they put us on Russian trucks. Okay? And the Russian trucks took us to trains. Okay, and here's an example of one of those trains. I don't know if this is one we were on or not. But they're very similar to what the Germans used to use to transport Jewish people to the killing centers. But the difference between these trains is that all of them had hay, they had blankets, they had some heating materials, they had food, unlike the German boxcars. So there was a different sense of riding the boxcar than it was previously. This, I was a little bit over 3 years of age, I think, at that time. And this is my first recollection as a child. I don't remember anything earlier than about 3.5 years of age. And the thing that I remember is that these trains would stop periodically to let all the people out so they could go to the bathroom, stretch themselves, etc., as they were going up to Siberia. Okay? And the thing that I remember is that when I got off the boxcar, I got into snow. I never played with snow before. I was 3.5 years of age. And there were other little kids like me, and we started playing with each other because I never played with another child until I was that age. So it was a real learning experience, and that's something that sticks in my mind forever, I think. This is just a boxcar. Here's what it looked inside. This train took us to northern Siberia. Northern Siberia is a very cold place. Mm-hmm. Okay, just to give you a sense, there's only 1 month out of the year that's above 32 degrees. Okay. So all of the people that were transported to different lumber camps to be workers at the lumber camps because the war was going on And the Russians needed the lumber for their war effort. So we were part of that workforce. And I wasn't, but my parents were. Now, just as a point of information, we got separated at the trains from my aunt and uncle. We didn't know where they were shipped at that point in time. So only my mom and dad, my older brother and me were the unit. We just somehow lost a couple others in the process. But I'll tell you a good story on that one. How much time do I have? Are we okay? Okay. Oh, I'm over time? Oh, okay, I didn't catch it. Okay. I have to abbreviate this now. Okay, this is just a picture. Men and women worked all the time, pretty much 12, 14-hour shift in these lumber camps. The kids were on their own. They had no adult supervision. My older brother became my tutor. Just to give you an example of how creative he must have been at that time. He would collect sawdust from the mill, put it on the floor in these cabins, and use a stick to teach me different symbols, letters, etc. So that was the first etch and sketch for your information. Okay. This is just a graphic picture of what generally the buildings and the snowdrifts. The snowdrifts varied anywhere from 9 to 16 plus feet. So no one could escape from that, even if they wanted to, because it was too cold, too tough. Anyway, we were there for about a year, then we were let go and allowed to travel through the Russian. This is a picture of my older brother and me in Siberia. We were well fed, we were well dressed, but it was done mostly by the kids themselves, with a little help at night by the parents, because the parents worked a pretty long shift. We left the confines of the lumber camp, and I'm kind of rushing here, and we learned a lot from just traveling through Russia. Then we wound up to land in Kazakhstan, which was one of the satellites of Russia at that time. My mom wound up working on the open market. My dad found a job there, and we were there for a couple of years. My dad was picked up for, I don't know what, but he was put in prison for almost a year. And they let him out of prison because he found us after he was let out of prison. And we kept on asking him, why were you in there? And why did they let you out? And he basically said, I don't know why they put me in there other than possible anti-Semitism. And why did they let you out? Well, they didn't have any record why they put me in there in the beginning. And they needed space, basically, for new people. So anyway, he was able to find us and locate us, and on May 8th, 1945, Germany surrendered, or Hitler dies shortly after Germany surrenders, and we get the legal papers from the Russians to leave that country. And my parents made a decision to try to go back to Poland to see if we could find any relatives alive. And we traveled back through Poland, and we didn't find anybody that was still alive. But anyway, as we were traveling, and I put this in quotes, because the travel was kind of dangerous, and we had all kinds of interesting things happen to our family. But anyway, we have the rumor mill that if we get to Berlin, which was then occupied by the Allied forces, and if we get to the American sector of Berlin, there are agencies that may help refugees. So that was the goal for us as we traveled back west through Poland to get to Berlin, Germany. Anyway, all kinds of stories on our travel in Berlin, but here's a picture of my older brother again. As you can see, we're in Berlin. We were in Berlin a very short time, maybe about 6 to 9 months, and then we were transferred to what were called DP camps, displaced persons camps. And most of them were located in Germany or in Poland. There were a couple of dozen throughout the middle of Europe. We wound up going to a camp called Fehrenwald, which, for some of you that are geography buffs, it was a very short distance from Munich, Germany, which was one of the major cities in Germany, or still is. Anyway, we were in the camp for 6 years after the war. I had a young brother that was born about 14 months after the war ended in the camp. This is kind of irony here. This is a layout of the camp that was under the auspices of the American military. And all of the street names, interesting, are like Florida, New York, Missouri, are all American states' names. And ironically, the Gigolds lived at 14 Illinois Street. What an irony here. But anyway, so in 1951, we were selected to come to the United States. We don't have the time to go through that, but this is actually the troop transport that brought the Gigold family to Ellis Island. This is a great hall at Ellis Island. My family in 1951 when we came. This is Baruch in 1951. That's me in 1951. Okay, we were settled in Milwaukee. I told you my parents were basically unskilled laborers, and we were sent to Milwaukee because at that time they had a lot of manufacturing plants. So it was easy to find a job for unskilled people. So my mom wound up. I have to tell you this little story. Can I have a few more minutes? Okay. Okay. When I came to this country, I never went to school before that. So I started learning the ABCs in junior high school. But because we came during the summer, I was very fortunate, is that I had a tutor assigned to me to try to at least teach me some survival language. The tutor would meet with me once or twice a week. My brother was not interested. He was too old already. He felt he wanted to work. But anyway, what I would do is, because I had a lot of free time as a kind of a preteen, teenager, I would pack a lunch and I would take the bus to downtown Milwaukee. And that's where they had all the movie theaters. And the movies would start maybe 11 o'clock in the morning and keep on recycling until late at night when they closed. And I would go to these movies and I would have a lunch there and I would sit there watching American movies anywhere from 4 to 6 hours a day. And most of the movies I was watching were cowboy movies. Okay. And just as a point of information, some of you might be able to relate to some of these people because some of you might be my age a little bit. I kind of jumped here. Here's Gene Autry. Roy Rogers and Dale, Cisco Kid, and Hopalong Cassidy. Okay. The reason I'm showing you this is these were the kinds of movies I was watching all the time. And so when I turned 18, and I went in front of the naturalization judge for citizenship papers. He couldn't pronounce my first name, Baruch. He tried a couple times and gave up, and he said, "Would you like an American name?" And lo and behold, a light bulb went on. And at that point in time, I remembered that Hopalong Cassidy's stage name was William Boyd, and he was the king of the cowboys at that time. So I said, William. That's how I got my name. Okay. The other thing is that this was my other instructional format. They call them graphic novels nowadays, but they used to be called comic books. And we lived very close to a thrift store that handled comic books. And I used to spend a lot of time going to that store, because we also shopped there, looking at comic books. But one day, the sales lady noticed how often I was there looking at comic books, so she started giving me the comic books free of charge so I could take them with me without spending that much time in the store. Anyway, the reason I bring this up is this is another way of learning the language of English. Is what I would do is I would try to read the darker colored or impressed words and try to look at whose cloud that was and look at expressions, so I would kind of correlate the word with the person and their expression. So that's how I picked up some of the words. And I think I'm going to maybe just wrap this up. This is my parents. My dad lived until he was only 76. My mom lived until she was 95. She was a tough one, as most women are. Let me just mention this book that was published. This is a book that was written by my nephew of my older brother, well, both of my brothers died. But I have to tell you about this book in the Gigold family, is that it took about 6 years for him to write this book. And what he did, while my older brother, and my mother were still alive, he would interview both of them at the same time and record everything. So I have all of the recordings of my mother and brother talking as to what information they shared with my nephew for the book that he wrote. Of course, he also did a lot of research to complement what they said. And that's why, some of the words are in Yiddish, because my mom never became fluent in English. She always mixed in other languages. I call them survival languages. My mom could speak 4 languages. She couldn't read or write any of them, but they were survival languages. Wherever we were, she learned what were the key words that she needed to know to express herself and negotiate things. My dad knew 5 languages, but I was very fortunate. He went to school up to the 4th grade, so he was educated. Okay? And he could read and write all of them. So he was able to pick that up. And anyway, for some of you that might be interested, I think Darlene has a couple of books left. Okay, what I like to do, if it's okay with you, is try to answer questions that you might have, comments that you have. Now, I've kind of talked, for a relatively short period of time. And I'll do the best I can to answer your questions if I can. Questions? Yes, sir.
Can you find out what happened to your aunt and uncle?
Good question. Good question. Yeah, we did. After we were settled in Milwaukee, that's where our family wound up coming to the United States. After a number of years, my dad took on himself to try to see if any of his immediate family or my mother's immediate family were still alive somewhere. So he started doing research. And he found out that both my aunt and uncle wound up being in Israel. Both of them, and interestingly enough, as part of my nephew's research for the book, he went to Israel and met all of the kids and relatives of my aunt and uncle who also had died. Yeah, so that's how, the family cycle is at this point in time. Other questions, please? No questions, huh? Yes?
How did you get to Illinois?
I'm sorry?
How did you get to Illinois here?
Oh, good question. Good question. I was very fortunate. My parents, even though they weren't terribly formally educated, just like most Jewish families, they prize education for their children. And there are very, very few Jewish families that don't do that. The high priority is to get as much education as you can. And the reason for that goes back many years in terms of the Jewish people. Because education and learning is one of the few things that you can't take away from anyone. You can take away their clothes, their food, even their physical being, but you can't take away the learning and education. And that's what kind of a very strong concept the Jewish people have. So when you hear comments about, they're all attorneys, they're all doctors, etc., that's the reason. Okay? Now, coming back to your question that you actually asked. Okay. Basically, we were sent to Milwaukee, and I had a lot of schooling in my life, just tons of it. My brother never pursued that, so I'm the only one that listened to my parents. He can't defend himself now anyway. So I was very fortunate. I got 3 degrees from Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin, 2 from the University of Minnesota, and 1 from UCLA. So education has been a real driver for me as well as my parents. But they're the ones that got me started on that. I hope I answered your question. And that's how we wound up coming here. I was recruited to Champaign.
Question over here. What languages did your mom know? You said she knew 4 languages. What were they?
Yeah, German, Russian, Polish, and Yiddish. She learned a little bit of English, but not much.
How did she learn 4 languages?
They were learned in the communities that we wound up being in situations. It's survival languages.
Okay.
We're good?
Yes, we're good.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that you had a younger sibling.
Yes.
You never really had any kind of pictures involving.
Yeah. My younger brother was 26 years of age. He just finished his engineering degree at Northwestern. And he was playing basketball. He was a jock, if I can use a term. And he keeled over and died while playing basketball.
Oh, wow.
So he was very short-lived in our family. But life goes on. Other questions? Yes?
I think everybody here wants to know why you didn't take Hopalong instead.
I probably couldn't spell it at that time. I don't know. I think because William is abbreviated frequently as Bill, but no thinking went into it other than recall. Yes, other questions? Yes.
How did your family what did they feel about your captors and how you were treated and all that? Did they have a sense of forgiveness?
Yeah, by and large, the Jewish people, and I'm just generalizing here, have not gone into the vengeance track. Even immediately after the Second World War. My parents never talked about the Holocaust as I was growing up. I learned a lot by reading my nephew's book and listening to the tapes that my parents and brother were recorded on. But there was never a word in our family that would reflect vengeance or hate for another human being, which is a lot to take in. But that was the way our family worked. And that's why I do some of the things that I do today. I hope I answered your question. Yes, ma'am.
Do you still live in Milwaukee?
I'm sorry?
Do you still live in Milwaukee?
No, I live in Champaign in a senior high-rise, to be exact. My wife and I, we've been married 58 years. Just downsized from a home of about 2,500 square feet to 1,100 square foot apartment. So we're having fun giving things away. No, we live in Champaign. By the way, I was recruited to Champaign-Urbana in the early 80s, so I've been a long-time resident of Champaign-Urbana. Other questions? Yes.
Okay, you say you have a lot of degrees. What is your major degree in?
I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm also a hospital administrator. I was vice president at Carl.
Ah,
Okay. So healthcare is my major arena, both administratively and clinically. I hope that answered your question.
mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have children?
Yes, we had 4. We have 3 now. Our oldest son died. And we have 6 grandchildren. The youngest is 18 and the oldest is 27. And let's see, 4 of them are in Champaign-Urbana. One attends the University of Illinois, and one attends Urbana High School, and one attends Parkland College, and the oldest one just works. Okay, so they're all into some form of education. Like I said, we kind of prize, we don't push, but we pride ourselves in encouraging in whatever way we can. Yes, well, thank you very much for your wonderful attention and even the wonderful questions that you have. My pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, I don't need a mic. I taught for 42 years, so half of it in middle school. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Brian Kahn. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Holocaust Education Center, which is a committee part of Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation. And we are so proud to be able to bring this exhibit and, of course, Bill to share with you here in Gibson City and neighboring communities. The exhibit, which will be up through the 29th, and you have all the information on your the flyer that you were given when you came in. Please take some time, if not today, to come back and set aside an hour and a half to go through the exhibit. It will take you on a chronological tour of the entire Holocaust. It was created by the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles. Simon Wiesenthal was a prisoner at Auschwitz, among other camps. He was rescued when the war ended. He started working for the British, and he became the head Nazi hunter in the world. And the Wiesenthal organization found and made it their challenge to hunt down as many former Nazis as they could. Again, as Bill said, not for revenge, but for justice. And they found many. There are still people that are being found in their 90s who participated in camps. I anticipate that's going to stop fairly soon, just with the age of people. But the Wiesenthal organization has a museum of tolerance, and their mission is to help educate people, not just about the Holocaust and genocide, but about intolerance and bigotry and apathy and hate and prejudice and discrimination, and especially in the schools. This exhibit was made about 2015. It's traveled to many countries. There's many copies of it out there, traveling to different cities. It's kind of antiquated now with the internet, and now you can see many of these panels and all this information online, but we still like to get a hold of it and share it with local schools and community members. probably 5th grade and up. I would hesitate to bring smaller children in. Not all of the panels show horrific images of bodies, but that was the reality. So some of the panels do. Many of the images are about the liberation and what happened when the soldiers liberated the camps and what they saw and what they filmed. So please be aware of that as you go through the exhibit. I want to thank Darlene and all the volunteers here for having us, and I hope that you have a good experience with the display while it's here in Gibson City, and I hope high school kids get to come and middle school kids. I know some groups are already signing up, and there's a number of pamphlets out front as you leave about our organization if you'd like to take anything with you. We'll have Bill's book up front if you would like to purchase a copy of that. And Darlene, thank you so much, and Gibson City and American Evangelical Lutheran Church members, thank you so very much.
Just so you know, all the proceeds from the sale of the book go to the Holocaust Museum.
I just wanted to say one thing before I finish up, and that was, you noticed how they kind of looked to me like to tell them what to do? That was just an act. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gigold. In just a moment, you are all invited to tour the display in our narthex and fellowship hall. Before we do, I'd like to share a declaration from our ELCA denomination to the Jewish people that was adopted by our church in 1994, that we might understand even more the importance of this work in our church. In the long history of the church, the treatment accorded the Jewish people by Christians has been among our most grievous and shameful legacies. Very few Christian communities of faith were able to escape the contagion of anti-Judaism and its modern successor, anti-Semitism. Lutherans belonging to the Lutheran World Federation and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America feel a special burden in this regard because of certain elements in the legacy of the reformer Martin Luther and the catastrophes, including the Holocaust of the 20th century, suffered by Jews in places where the Lutheran churches were strongly represented. The Lutheran communion of faith is linked by name and heritage to the memory of Martin Luther, teacher and reformer. Honoring his name in our own, we recall his bold statement, his bold stand for truth, his earthly and sublime words of wisdom, and above all, his witness to God's saving word. Luther proclaimed a gospel for people as we really are. Bidding us to trust a grace sufficient to reach our deepest shames and address the most tragic truths. In the spirit of that truth-telling, we who bear his name and heritage must with pain acknowledge also Luther's anti-Judaic diatribes and the violent recommendations of his later writings against the Jews. As did many of Luther's own companions in the 16th century, we reject this violent invective, and yet more do we express our deep and abiding sorrow over its tragic effects on subsequent generations. In concert with the Lutheran World Federation, we particularly deplore the appropriation in our day of Luther's words by modern anti-Semites for the teaching of hatred and incitement to violence toward Judaism and the Jewish people. Grieving the complicity of our own tradition within this history of hatred, moreover, we express our urgent desire to live out our faith in Jesus Christ with love and respect for the Jewish people. We recognize in anti-Semitism a contradiction and an affront to the gospel, a violation of our hope and calling. And we pledge this church to oppose the deadly working of such bigotry, both within our own circles and in the society around us. Finally, we pray for the continued blessing of the Blessed One upon the increasing cooperation and understanding between Lutheran Christians and the Jewish community. Let us pray. Gracious God, move us to work for the common good of all people, especially those among us who may be vulnerable. As we remember the horrors perpetrated on Jewish people during the Holocaust of the 20th century, inspire us to stand for the fruit of your Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. We give thanks for the opportunity to be together today, trusting that your love is at work among us. And all God's people say, Amen. Let us again thank Mr. Gigold for his time among us. And now you are invited to tour the display in our narthex and fellowship hall. Thank you again for coming.